some part that you guys are being discussing with maybe Dr. Shami on or Dr. Mai, I guess, all right, during that time, all right. So we will talk about this alteration of generations, all right. This is quite important, especially if you guys understand the genetic parts lah, of course lah, for the fertilization process, right? So this is what we will talk lah for today: alteration of generation, sexual reproduction, and gamete formations, right? For several species of plants in other modes of reproduction. So the other mode of reproduction will be brief. This is more on the 7 to 8 types of asexual reproductions, right? So budding, all right, beneficiation, and so on. All right. So let's talk about this a little bit, all right? So this is as general as we could, all right? So human life cycle concept, I think we talked about this since last week, yeah, regarding the diploid and haploid of humans punya chromosome that we have, all right? So we have around 46 chromosome, and this is includes ataupun dalam groups of 23 pairs of chromosomes, all right? So remember that we talk about the chromosome number 23 is the sex chromosome, where is determined the gender of the human being, all right? So the life cycle of human starts, all right, with the gamete cell diploid, and then when they undergo meiosis process, which is where we understand a few process last week, all right, regarding the anaphase phase, where they have the genetic exchange, all right, during that particular phase, all right. So this is where the diversity would become, right? So that's why they become the haploid gametes, all right. So in the form of either sperms ataupun ovum, all right. So these gametes, all right, will undergo fertilization, where they are coming from haploid punya organism atau haploid punya phase lah, right? And then when they undergo fertilization process, right? So they are becoming the diploid back, right? So this is what we call a diploid zygote lah, right? So kita punya zygotes, where later they will develop into babies and so on, right? Zygote will undergo mitosis and develop into an adult, right? So the key concept here is the production of meiosis in humans ataupun animals, we call the gametes, right? So this is where they become the haploid phase, right? So you can see from the picture here, right? Right, the blue color, all right, the green color, sorry, the green color is the haploid phase of human being, right? So normally the haploid phase of human being is quite short, it's not that long, right? They're in the form of this particular gametes, right? Either sperms ataupun ovum. When they undergo fertilization process, this is where they will become the diploid back. Jadi diploid balik, alright? So when diploid balik, they will undergo mitosis, several development punya process. They will be developed into babies, and then teenagers and adults, right? So this become the human being, right? So however, the concept in plants a little bit different. Not saying that they are different, tapi they are the two phase, alright? Two phase in their punya life cycles, right? So that's why we call it alteration of the generations, right? So there are some phase of plants, right? Some phase of plants, dia ada structure juga yang quite prominent structure, I could say, in their punya haploid punya formation, alright? So in the haploid punya formation, sometimes they have a quite dominant structures, and sometimes dia punya phase, right? In haploid punya phase tu sometimes maybe much longer ataupun balance, right? Sometimes they become in the haploid phase tu, dia adalah dia punya lifetime ataupun shelf life dia maybe sometimes sama ataupun longer compared to they are in the diploid punya forms, something like that lah. So we talk about that after this. So just want to understand the key concept here adalah production of meiosis in plants are called spores. Alright, so this is where they undergo the meiosis process, they become haploid. So we call it the spores is becoming haploids, which means that in sporophytes 2N, right, diploid, they will undergo meiosis punya process and producing the spores. And while these particular spores later, right, they will undergo mitosis process All right, so they form a structure called gametophytes, and then these gametophyte later they will produce gamete when they undergo the mitosis process as well. All right, so sporophyte and gametophyte is not just a different life stages, but it's also sometimes can be a separated plants. This is what I mean. Dia kadang-kadang structure dia in this particular two phase, sometimes dia different. Alright, so dia memang different lah, macam manusia memang different lah. Alright, gamete dengan sperm dengan ovum tu memang different. However, they are in very the shelf life is very short compared to in plant. Sometimes they are quite prominent. Haploid. Alright. So the term of alteration of generation is normally we call it in the plant punya life cycles, right? So what phase are they in, and what phase are they in that particular structures, and how they grow and survive, right? So this is the definition. Alright, the regular alternation of forms or a mode of reproduction in the life cycle of an organism, such as an alteration between diploid and haploid phases, or between sexual and asexual reproduction cycles. All right. So bear in mind, all right. So in plants, all right, they also have the sexual and asexual punya reproduction punya process as well. So asexual normally they undergo the mitosis process banyak lah. All right. So this is where they develop it. All right. So diploid sporophyte produce a haploid spore, macam yang saya cakap tadi lah. They produce a haploid spore through the meiosis lah. Right? So and then the spores develop into haploid gametophytes, where this is will produce the gamete themselves through the mitosis process. All right? So as you guys understand, when gametes, right, undergo fertilization process, right, they becoming the diploid organism back. Alright, dia punya half daripada each of the gametes lah. Normally this is coming from the each of the parents, alright. So they will become a diploid organism back. Right, so this is where the life cycle yang kita nak nampak lah. So this is quite important for our next week punya topics, alright. So because understanding the haploid ataupun the fertilization process lah, each one is coming from the half of it's coming from the each of the parents lah, paternal and maternal. Alright, when they undergo fertilization process, they become diploid back. So this is where the genetics mix up ataupun the genetics pool, alright, can become more diverse. Alright, so this is when you guys understand about this, understand about the genetic pools, right? So this is where you guys need to understand one thing, right? So gene pooling, right? Genetic pool ni is quite diverse, alright. So that's why whenever there's a lot of mix up of genetics, they will become more and more diverse, alright. So I hope you guys understand this term concept, alright. So I think in history of royal family, I give you example history of royal family in maybe in UK, right? The royal families, all right. Last time, previously, all right. Previously, the gene pools, all right. The gene pools, just among the punya royal family sahaja, right? So that's why any genetic punya disease, any genetic punya inheritance, right? Normally they akan pool dalam gene yang sama sahaja. So that's why I think if you learn history, all right. So the genetic pool sometimes that's why the certain situation where the royal families dying young, right? Ataupun they have a certain disease, right? So yang is rare, kadang-kadang kita nak jumpa, but they is there, right? Due to this particular genetic pools yang terlampau conserve, dia tak dilute, right? So that's why in Islam as well, right? The further you go, we are digalakkan untuk berkahwin, bergalakkan untuk with having a families with a little bit diverse, right? So that's why kita boleh bersuai kenal, and this kind of things that can trigger sebenarnya the genetics punya diversity sebenarnya. So that's why if you guys realize lah, I think you guys punya generations compared to previous punya generation, there's a lot of mixed genetics pool. We can see macam you can see in Korea and Japan as well, and same goes in Malaysia right now. Alright, due to the genetic pools, we can see like not like previous generation. This new generation sometimes we can see dia kadang-kadang dia more tinggi, dia nampak tinggi, nampak cerah. That's why macam sometimes we ask, oh, this is Malay ataupun mix and so on. This is particular genetic pool is dah sekarang ni dah quite interesting. I would like to say lah. Sebab kebanyakan ni kita dah all of the previous generations, so they're more diverse, they mix marriage and so on. So this is why the genetics right now is quite interesting, I would say lah. Sebab dia dah banyak diverse. So that's why you can see sebenarnya if the diversity of genetics ni can also triggers dia punya developments as well, including the brains lah. Right, so that's why more diverse is more triggers dia punya genetic development ni. Right, so this is way making us become more and more diverse right now. So boleh jadi macam maybe in like Korea in Japan, the new generation of Korea peoples in Korea and Japan is tak macam orang dulu lah. Right, orang dulu mungkin rendah-rendah, katik-katik sikit and so on. But nowadays, maybe due to the environment phenotypes jugalah, environment ni juga. Tapi this is among the factors adalah playing quite important role adalah the genetics. Right, so dekat Japan, I was staying there, dekat Japan dia banyak mixed marriage as well. Dulu tak allowed sangat mixed marriage, just Japan with Japanese saja. Japanese with Japanese, but right now there's a lot of diversity lah, right? So they mixed marriage as well. So you can see the diversity of them as well kat sana. Same goes to Malaysian as well. Alright, so I would say I'm quite happy. Bukan quite happy. I love to see the changes of the pools of genetics lah on this. Alright. So I hope you understand on that. Sorry buat panjang dekat situ pula. Alright. So that's why when undergo fertilization process, so this is where the mix up is mixture of the genes lah. So they become the diploid. Alright. Let's talk about moss. Kita go into the first plants yang kita nak bincang. Alright. Talk about moss. Moss ni familiar tak? Do you guys know about moss? Pernah nampak moss ke? Do you guys know what is moss? Hello? Apa dia? Hello? Apa dia, Mas?
Moss tu lumut kan?
Yes, moss tu adalah lumut. Lumut, yes, dia adalah lumut. Alright? So did you know that lumut yang awak nampak tu, yang kali hijau, right? That is the haploid punya form of them. Right? So lumut yang kita nampak, yang familiar, yang kita nampak. So kita contohnya dekat Cameron Highland pun ada moss punya moss punya walk dekat atas tu, something like that. Right, moss is the moss yang lumut yang kita nampak ni. Alright, kali hijau tu, they are in the haploid form. Right, so they quite prominent in the moss punya story. Right, the moss plant moss ni, they have a very prominent haploid punya form. Right, very prominent haploid punya form, which mean that kita always see them in this particular phase. Right, kali hijau ni. Right, this particularly lumut hijau ni, dia adalah in the form of haploid. Right, dia gametophytes punya form lah. Right, this particular form lah yang akan undergo mitosis and producing dia punya gametes in the term of sperms ataupun eggs lah. And then when these particular gametes are fertilized, then they will produce, they will develop and produce the sporophyte punya structure, which is the diploid punya structure. If you can see from here lah. Right, dekat sini you guys can see from here the color brownish color yang tumbuh di atas moss ni, dia ada punya diploid punya form. Right, this particular diploid punya form will undergo meiosis punya process and produce dia punya gametes, where this particular gamete will undergo produce the spore, where this particular spore is in the haploid punya phase, and this spore pula yang akan undergo mitosis process produce the gametophyte punya structures. Right, yang kali hijau ni. And then the cycles goes on. Right, so this is where, right, the alteration of generation occurs. right? Sometimes in plant they a little bit different according to the species, alright? So in moss ni, right? So awak akan nampak yang kali hijau tu banyak dia in the haploid punya form, which mean that these are the spores that undergo mitosis punya process, right? So this is where they producing dia punya structure called this gametophyte structure lah, yang kali hijau ni, right? Yang macam lumut yang kita boleh nampak. And then this is the haploid punya structures, alright? So boleh nampak the diploid punya structures kalau awak go into detail, pergi dekat moss banyak ni, and then sometimes you can see the diploid punya structures lah, yang dia akan tumbuh di atas this particular moss, alright, this particular haploid punya structures. Right, this is where they already undergo fertilization and producing these particular structures lah. Alright, so this particular sporophyte punya structures, right, dia akan grow di atas the gametophyte punya structure, the haploid punya structure. So boleh nampak, tapi tapi I would like to say here that dia punya haploid punya phase is more prominent compared to the diploid punya phase of in the moss. Right, tak nampak sangat, but compared to human being lah, right, human being kita punya haploid punya phase is very short lah, right? So maybe sperm can stay for 3 days, right? So eggs, if I'm not mistaken, 1 day, if I'm not mistaken, but it's very short juga lah, not that long, alright, compared to this particular alteration of generation process ataupun generation that happen in this particular plant called moss. Alright, so this is where there is. Alright, so I hope you guys don't worry regarding the explanation, we be there dekat sebelah ni. Alright, I just want to discuss about the figures and pictures with you guys. Alright, so the fertilization process is like usual. Alright, the sperm will fertilize with the eggs, straightforward, tak macam complex macam angiosperms lah. Right, so the straightforward, this particular fertilization process will produce the zygote lah. And then they produce these particular structures. Alright, called stalk. Okay, let's go into look into a fern pula. Right, fern life cycle. Right, fern ni paku pakis lah. Alright, the fern ni pula normally is not really not bukan pokok yang berbatang, not the herbs as well, but they are in the category of ferns. Right, the herbs types lah. Alright, so actually fern ni alright, so I can say as a summary, right, dia punya haploid dengan diploid punya life cycle tu almost lebih kurang sama, right, almost lebih kurang sama. Nak kata in haploid lama, not really, nak kata in diploid lama, not really juga. So they are quite balanced lah, alright, compare to moss tadi. Tapi yang normally yang kita boleh nampak dekat fern ni adalah dia punya diploid punya structure lah. Tapi diploid punya structure tu pula, right, dia akan produce sama macam fern tadi, sama macam moss tadi, dia akan tumbuh di atas gametophyte punya structure, di atas the haploid punya structure. Let's see apa proses dia. Alright, so kita tengok dekat mature sporophyte. Alright, mature sporophyte, this is the diploid punya form lah. Alright, the daun. Alright, dekat bawah daun tu dia ada sporangium kat bawah dia. Right, this particular sporangium dia akan produce the spores. Alright, so when they undergo mitosis process, so sporangium dia ada banyak sel kat dalam. When they undergo meiosis punya process, this is where they producing the spores. And this particular spores, when they undergo meiosis, the spore is in the haploid punya form. Right, so when these particular spores are released, right, they will develop into young gametophyte. They will undergo mitosis lah. Right, so these particular spores will undergo mitosis punya process, and then they will develop the young gametophyte punya structure ataupun gametophyte punya structures early phase lah. Alright, so this particular phase dia akan produce, dia akan develop dan jadi membesar. So we call it gametophyte punya structures. We call that these particular structures, right, when they develop, they will contain both parts, which is the male and female punya part in one particular structures. Alright, so in the female punya part, we call it achinogenium. Alright, the male punya part is called antheridium lah. Right, so this particular structure is very, very unique. Alright, it is very, very unique. This we call it protellus. Alright, protellus punya structures. So this particular protellus punya structure is little bit look like a love shape punya structures lah. Right, the love shape punya structures. Right, so this is where they will undergo the fertilization process. this is where, right, since they are in the similar structure, right, they just need some moist condition ataupun hujan for the sperm, right, to move towards the egg for fertilization process, right? So that's why in this particular structure, they have both parts, female and male parts, alright? So they akan directly fertilize lah when the condition is permissible, like the moist, right? So sebab dia perseberangan dia sahaja, right? You can see from here, kalau gambar kat bawah tu, right, this particular figures, right? So echinogonium dekat atas, antheridium dekat bawahnya. So they can directly move from one part to another part, straightforward kat situ. Alright, so this is where the fertilization process directly will process, right? They will form the zygote. So since both of them are in the haploid punya form, right? So when they undergo fertilization process, they will become diploid back. Alright, so dekat sini lah dia akan jadi diploid. Alright, so dekat sini they will remain, right? They will remain the haploid punya structure, the gametophyte punya structure, but they just develop above the gametophyte punya structures, right? They just develop, they will produce the new sporophyte structures, new diploid punya structure when they undergo the mitosis process, right? Then they later will form the mature sporophyte, the mature fern yang kita boleh nampak sekarang. So you guys can see, if you guys go to like hiking and so on, try to look up in the bottom part of the ferns. Tengok dekat mana. So you guys sometimes can see the gametophyte punya structures lah. The haploid structures where they are forming daripada situ. Right? So this is where they quite balance lah. Memang nak kata kalau nak jadi fern tu lama lah. Right? Tapi nak kata balance tu not directly balance lah macam saya cakap awal tadi. Cuma they have this particular phase. Right, they can remain in this particular gametophyte ataupun haploid punya phase. Right, they can remain. But if they undergo fertilization process, they can produce the secondary structures. Right, which is the diploid punya structures. But if they are not undergo fertilization process, they will remain in this particular haploid punya form, the gametophyte punya form sahaja. Right, so remember the protellus punya structure, right, love shape structure, we call it, right? It's called protellus, right? So this is particular structure yang akan kita nampak in the gametophyte punya phase, right? So dia akan develop on top of the gametophyte, dan dia akan produce the fern on it, right? And then the life cycles goes similar, right? So remember the color bluish color dengan the cream colors lah, right? So this is dia punya phase, right? So as far ada questions before we go further? Ada soalan?
No.
Okay.
Alright. So you guys can follow me Right. If you guys have any question, just stop me anytime. So we can talk more on that. Don't worry. Yeah. Alright. So this is the particular process and structure. So this is fern. So the explanation is here. You guys can read it later. Right. So don't worry on that. So I give you guys the notes already. Okay. So next we go for the gymnosperms. Normally we call it naked seed lah. Seed yang biasanya dia tak keluar buah lah. Alright. So dia nak kata buah, not directly buah, tapi just more on structure lah. Alright. Like the corn, pokok pen ni. Normally dia tak ada buah tapi dia produce structure that can cover up dia punya ovule ataupun dia punya gametes kat dalam. Alright, so as you guys can see from here, right? You can see from here, the cream colors dengan the bluish color ni not really balance, bukan balance. Dia nak katakan dia punya phase ni is quite short. The haploid phase is quite short compared to dia punya diploid punya phase lah. Sebab this is pokok branching trees, right? Dia memang dia akan shelf lah dia lama, right? So that's why dia punya diploid punya phase ni will become much more longer, alright? Almost similar like macam human being lah, alright? So dia just in the haploid punya form during the fertilization process saja, alright? So we can see from here, alright? You can see from here there's two parts that you guys can focus on lah, alright? Satu pollen cone dengan satu ovulate cone sebenarnya. Ovulate cone is normally for the female punya structures lah. And the pollen cone ni pula is for the male punya structures. Right, so because orang dekat male dulu lah, but this is very short punya process, right? In male punya structures, the pollen cone, right, they have the microsporocytes kat dalam, right? This particular microsporocytes ni adalah the process where they produce dia punya gametes lah, right, dekat sini, ataupun dia produce dia punya spores, right? So in the previous type of plants, in the moss and in fern, right, so the spores will undergo mitosis process and producing the gamete, and gamete will produce the gametophyte punya structures. However here, right, they will produce spores, right, in the form of pollen. Alright, so this particular pollen will undergo mitosis process. Alright, so the microsporocyte to microsporangium, right? So this is where this particular structure they are in diploid punya form. Dekat sini, okay, microsporangia adalah plural lah. Microsporangia ni adalah dia punya singular, right? So this microsporangium ni dia ada sel yang banyak kat dalam. What happen to the cell is that they undergo meiosis punya process, right? They undergo meiosis punya process, they will produce spores in the form of pollen grain, right? So these particular spores in the form of pollen grain, they will undergo mitosis process, dia akan produce banyak lah. So these particular pollen grains lah yang akan jadi dia punya gametes for fertilization process. Alright, so keep it there first. Alright, so this particular pollen grain, alright, with the assistance of climate ataupun the condition of the environment lah, alright. Kalau ada angin yang bertiup, kalau ada dia dibawa ke ataupun this particular cone ni, ovulate cone ni, dia jatuh kat bawah, and suddenly this particular pollen grains pun pergi ke bawah juga, and somehow Allah takdirkan dia berjumpa right dekat bawah dan dia undergo fertilization process. This is where anak pokok tu baru boleh bertumbuh for the next side dia lah. Alright, ataupun for example ada burung ke yang bawa pelari this particular pollen cone ni, alright. So and then this particular pollen grains ni pass through all the process, terjumpa pula this particular ovule cone ni somewhere else, right? Kisah cinta pula. Alright, so they made up and then they undergo fertilization process as well, and then they boleh tumbuh dekat tempat lain berdekatan. Alright, so this is where they can develop dan tumbuh balik lah. Dia tak akan tumbuh dekat tempat yang sama lah, dia akan bertumbuh dekat tempat yang berbeza lah. Alright, so this is where they akan pergi ke ovule nanti. Alright, so with the assistance of the environment lah, alright, they will somehow will try to catch up with the ovules, alright, with ovule cone. Alright, ovule cone ni pula in the process of ovule cone, alright, so they have the megasporocytes kat dalam, alright, so this normally they akan produce the eggs kat dalam lah, alright, like angiosperms, right, like angiosperm, they will undergo meiosis punya process, right, so normally they produce the 4 haploid structures, but only one will remain, alright, this particular one remain, they will undergo mitosis punya process, they will produce a few cells lah kat dalam, nucleic 7 cells, right? So these particular cells lah yang akan undergo fertilization process, right? So this is where they will berjumpa lah, dia akan berjumpa dekat this particular structure, right? The ovule punya structures. Sorry, right? So what happen adalah when this particular process occurs, right? This particular process occurs, right? They will fertilize this particular sporangium kat dalam ni. Right, so process is a little bit similar macam angiosperms, right? They will produce this particular pollen grain ni, dia akan move towards this particular structures of megasporangium, right? So this megasporangium, they already undergo meiosis process where they have the 8 nucleated 7 cells, right? Dekat sini, and then these particular pollen grains will produce pollen tube. Similar macam angiosperm juga, right? Dia akan masuk this particular site dan dia akan undergo fertilization process. Right? So this fertilization process will undergo inside of this particular cone. Alright? So what interesting about this? Alright? What interesting about this? Alright? Compared to the angiosperm dekat enter tu. Alright? Dekat sini dia in the separate punya structures. Alright? In the cone punya structures. what happened in this particular cone punya structures, alright, they will be caught by them, alright. When they be caught by them, they will be protected inside, alright. The seed is protected inside this particular cone, alright. So this particular seed protecting them, alright. So dia punya seed tu akan selamat daripada all the environmental punya changes lah, alright. Dia ada kat dalam, so they will be guarded by the cells yang ada, alright. They will be provided by the nutrients and so on, so until they become a proper seeds, right? So when this particular proper seeds dah develop, and this is where these seeds akan bercambah dekat tanah, alright. Alright, dia akan jatuh dan bercambah. So let's say dia occurs dekat jatuh lah, dia tak jatuh, right? Dia fertilize directly dekat sini, dan dekat situlah dia dapat all the nutrient, dan dia akan sampai dia matang, dia akan gugur kat bawah, dan dia akan jadi seed balik in the nearby place. Alright, so what happen, this is the process yang boleh berlaku where they will produce the seedlings, the new seedlings, and these new seedlings will undergo development, undergo the mitosis punya process, right? So they will develop into a matured punya structures, the tree punya structures, right? So this is where the process is, right? So remember, they have these two particular parts, right? These are ovulate cone dengan pollen cone. This is where they will produce the gametes, and this is where, right? Here, this is where they will undergo fertilization process in the ovule. So dekat sinilah dia akan buat the pollen tubes, right? They undergo the fertilization process, and then this is where they will be guarded. The seeds akan being caught, dan dia akan provide a lot of the energy inside, right? So dia being covered, dan dia akan bertumbuh lah kat situ, right? Okay, so any questions from here? Alright, so remember, correct, question tak ada. Alright, remember lah, right? So when they fertilize, dan this one will jatuh lah, alright. Dia akan jatuh bila dia matured, dan dia akan bertambah kat situ. Dan kan kalau pokok, kalau ada burung ke yang suka bawa kon lari di tempat lain, alright, dan dia akan bertambah kat tempat lain lah, alright. So this is where the process is, alright. So this is the explanation kat dalam, you guys can read it directly by yourself, right? So dia ada pin code lah. So our main event of today adalah kita akan bawa pasal this one, right? The angiosperm, the flowering plants. But don't worry, I'm not talking about these particular figures. We talk about it in here, alright? So we talk about it in the two separate ni lah, two separate process, right? Go to male dengan female. But this is the overall process of them, right? So a little bit similar macam angiosperms tadi, alright? So they have two particular structures that producing the male dengan female punya parts lah, right? So this is one is anther, one is the stigma lah. And this all the fertilization process occurs dekat ovule juga, tapi this is inside these particular flowers lah, dekat dalam, in one of them, alright? So when undergo meiosis process in the anther ni, we produce the male punya parts, and this ovary will produce the eggs, female punya parts lah, kat sini, right? So what happened is this particular process, right? So we go for the male first, right? In male, kita boleh nampak pollen sacs kat dalam lah. This particular pollen sacs, they have the microspores, which is they have this particular diploid cell ada dekat dalam. Right? This particular diploid cells ada banyak. So this diploid cell will undergo meiosis process, which is make them become more and more banyak lah. They produce the 4 haploid cells kat dalam tu. Alright? So when they undergo meiosis process, they will become haploid punya structure cell dekat dalam. Right? So what happened with this particular haploid cells punya structures? Right? They will undergo mitosis process where they will produce the pollen grains. What happened to pollen grains? Pollen grains consist of two type of cell yang ada dekat dalam. Right? One is the tube cell, one is the generative cells. Right? These particular cells is very, very important for the fertilization process later. Right? So that's why they have two types, right? One is tube cell. Obviously, they will produce the pollen tube. Right, the generative cell is where they're bringing all the genetic materials yang ada. Right, this particular generative cell will become two separated sperm later when they undergo fertilization process. Alright, so bear in mind dan please remember dekat generative cell ni normally orang get confused. Alright, they first come with the generative cell and suddenly they become two separated sperm cell. Which one each, this is what we call it the double fertilization process. Right, one will fertilize the egg later and one will fertilize the central cell later. Alright, so this is where we call it the double fertilization process. Alright, so don't worry, the explanation is also here. You guys can directly read by yourself later. Right, let's go for the female punya structures lah. Alright, so this is where we talk just now. Right, similar in the angiosperm. Alright, the megaspores is a diploid punya form. When they undergo meiosis punya process, right, they normally have the 4 haploid lah. Remember we talk about the meiosis process last time. One cell can convert into 4 haploids daughter cell. Alright, each one of them it will be different. Right, in this particular process, 3 of them will be degenerated. Right, and only surviving 1 megaspores in the haploid form. What happened in this particular haploid form is that they will undergo mitosis process, in which is very unique. Alright, this particular mitosis process, they will produce 8 cells. Alright, 8 cells, but they will produce 7 cells, but having 8 nucleus. Alright, so this is the structure of the cell. Alright, so the antipodal, right, this antipodal will be at the end of the particular structures. Alright, the antipodal. Alright, so the polar nuclear will be in the equatorial punya area in these particular structures. Alright, so this is where the polar nuclear will be fertilized with one of the generative cells later. Alright, so synergic cell and the egg cell is these particular structures. They will form these structures. Alright, the egg cell will contain all the genetic material will be fertilized, and the synergic cell is the one that will guide the pollen tube. Alright, to fertilize the egg later. Alright, so this particular structure is very, very unique and it's very, very specific. Alright, so please understand about the function of each of antipodals. Alright, the polar nuclear and synergics might be come from one of two you guys punya apa nama question maybe, I'm not too sure. Alright, so please understand this particular process in general. Alright, so when we understand about the generative cell in the pollen grain, alright, and this particular ovule in ovum in the ovule, alright, so what happened to them is this. Don't worry, ni you guys boleh baca lah, sebab this is all the process of the female punya process tadi. Alright, dia ada cakap synergic cell, ada pollen tube and so on. Alright, so this is what happened. Alright, this is what happened. Remember the pollen grain just now? Alright, they have 2 type of cell. Alright, one is generative cell, is one is pollen tube cell. What happened in this in detail is that, alright, so when they arrive in the stigma, right, from the anther, alright, they will produce the pollen tube. Right, this particular pollen tube will be produced by the tube cells, right? So they can produce. What happened is inside here is that the generative cell will be divided, undergo mitosis, will have 2 sperm cells. Right, this particular 2 sperm cell, they will move towards one of the ovules kat dalam. Alright, so these particular ovules, they're ready to receive them. Alright, they're ready to receive them. Is that that will be guided by the synergic cell. Synergic cell ni yang akan guide the pollen tube cell untuk penetrate the particular ovule. So what happened inside that is that the 2 generative cells will arrive at the ovule, and one of them will fertilize the polar nuclear cell, right? And the other one will fertilize the egg cells. So from here, all right, from here, this is what Allah creation is very, very, very detailed and very, very interesting. Because wonderful, right? So each one of the cell have their own function to support and to protect and to guide the particular zygote yang dibuat. Alright, so when they undergo fertilization process, they will become diploid. Alright, so this is where they will develop further, alright, into becoming jadi buah lah. Alright, jadi buah pula, jadi seeds. Alright, what happen adalah buah yang di sekeliling seed tu lah akan jadi dia punya protection and provide all the nutrients and provide the hormones yang ada dekat dalam. Alright, so this will become the seeds lah sebenarnya. Alright, so when this become the seeds, the buah tu adalah dia punya protection layers yang kita makan. Alright, so what happen adalah this is what happen. Alright, the seed is there. Alright, buah tu lah yang akan cover the particular seeds ataupun the particular fertilization tadi. Alright, so this is the seed yang kita nak. Seed tu lah yang sebenarnya yang kita nak lah for the next progeny ataupun the next inheritance ataupun dia punya offspring lah. Right, tapi buah tu adalah kita punya Allah punya creation, give it to plants ataupun any organisms lah, right, for the source of food, like that, right. The fruit formation, while the seeds is developing from ovule, the fruit is developing from the ovary dekat luar, alright. Fruit is a ripened ovary plus the seeds of flowering inside dekat dalam, alright. So this is what happens sebenarnya. Fruits protect the developing seeds and will participate in their dispersal using the wings of the animals. So this is where pokok kalau dalam hutan ni, dispersion ni, alright, if you guys realize kalau kadang-kadang pergi dalam hutan, buat jungle trekking and so on, kita tengok ada buah terbiar atau buah dah kena makan dan bersepah dekat tempat sekeliling. So normally, this is the thing yang akan disperse kan, atau dia akan bertumbuh dekat tempat yang berbeza-beza due to the animals punya process as well, and as well as environmental factors jugalah. Alright, so one tips if you guys go into the jungle, alright, apa yang haiwan makan normally is okay for us to eat lah. Maknanya kalau you guys tak ada bekalan makanan, contoh jumpa satu buah ni tiba-tiba ada kesan gigitan dalam makanan kan, so try to find the similar buah, so maybe that is okay for you to eat because ada haiwan lain yang makan lah, maksudnya macam dia tak berbahaya lah, bukan beracun and so on, something like that lah. Right, so this is the process of that. So what happen normally flowering plant ni yang akan produce buah lah. Alright, so this is where the process untuk producing buah lah. Kalau tengok buah mangga, kalau tengok buah durian and so on. Kalau flowering plant yang normally dia memang tak produce buah lah. Alright, so they just produce more flowers and so on. Alright, so I guess that's all for kita punya alteration of generations. Any questions before we go to our next part? It will be our last part lah actually. Ada questions?
Tak ada.
Alright, so we go for our next part lah. Alright, so this is the parts that we talk since last week lah sebenarnya. Alright, we undergo the meiosis and mitosis punya process. Remember the sexual reproduction where we undergo the meiosis punya process. Alright, so they also have the asexual punya reproduction process. Alright, so asexual reproduction process ni consist of few processes yang kita boleh faham lah. Alright, binary fission, vegetative reproduction, budding, spores formations, alright, fragmentation and regeneration. I just want to highlight here spore formations sini they sometimes they can become a sexual process lah, right? So they will have more and more structure of that particular spores. They can be used for process, right? So vegetative reproduction ni is more on like macam we can use any parts of the particular plants to propagate. Normally we utilize this particular this particular understanding is in tissue culture lab lah. Alright, vegetative reproduction ni boleh tanam juga. Alright, normally kita pun boleh ambil juga is for the parts of the tissue culture process lah. We can trigger them with a few hormones. We can trigger to produce shoots ataupun trigger to produce the roots and so on. Alright, so the binary fissions is straightforward. Alright, the single parent cell divide into two daughter cells. Alright, like amoeba ataupun paramecium. Alright, this is an example of asexual lah, not directly pokok yang buat asexual process. Alright, so budding is like more parents produce bud, it gets detached and developed into a new individual. Alright, Right, so this is a little bit different compared to binary fission. Binary fission is just more on the cell divides into two, right? Tapi dia become two individual. Tapi tak macam cell division lah, right? Tapi budding ni pula dia develop into new individual, right? From one particular structures. So it's just like yeast ataupun hydra lah. Hydra ni I'm not too sure what is it. I need to check it out. But yeast ni yes, type of dia punya fungus ni kita tahu lah. Alright. Spore formations, alright, reproduced by forming spores under favorable conditions. Spore develop into new individual juga, right? So normally I would say like certain fungus and certain bacteria juga dia akan produce spores, right? Normally bacteria dengan spores ni, bacteria they will not undergo sexual production, right? So they will undergo sexual reproduction, alright? So what happens? Some bacteria and most fungus and some bacteria ada produce spores. Alright, these particular spores will become a new individual. Alright, tak macam yang dalam plants. Plants is more on the formation of the gametes. So they need to undergo fertilization dan they akan fertilize these particular structures. Except from the moss lah. Moss dia akan buat new structures baru, where this particular structure pun dia akan undergo fertilization process. But for fungus and bacteria, they will not undergo fertilization process. They just simply become new individuals saja. Kalau jumpa spores, if you just let it there, they will propagate dengan banyak. Same goes, this is the main issue kalau kita dekat tissue culture lab lah. I believe you guys did it last week. Last week kan, you guys did it in the laboratory. Last 2 weeks did in the laboratory in the tissue culture with the laminar flow. Alright, dekat situ kita tak nak any fungus punya contamination. Sebab any spores yang ada, awak letak dia dekat dalam yang tiba-tiba ada plate with nutrient kat dalam and then that's it. They will just propagate banyak kat dalam tu. Alright. So goes for fragmentation process, organism with filamentous body, right? Breaks into 2 or more fragments. Each fragment grows into a new individual structures. This is like more sporangia, right? This is more on like aquatic punya phase of animals, right? So this actually is quite unique, to be honest, right? So macam science fiction lah a little bit. Each part of them berpecah dan become new individual and it's unlimited lah. Right? Tapi they have the limit lah. There's certain size that you cannot propagate and so on until quite under optimum condition ataupun environment so they can grow. If not, they will not grow lah. Alright? Regeneration, organism body breaks up into one of the several part. Each part develop into new individual, explanaria. Alright? Macam hydra juga tadi, right? Budding dengan regeneration. They can regenerate back. So when we talk about the regeneration, alright? So makes me triggers. This is not really related with the asexual production, alright? But when we talk about regeneration process ni, actually in reptiles, in cicak lah, lizards, alright? Right, certain amphibians as well, alright? Macam cicak ni kalau putus ekor, they can regenerate back to become new structure of the ekor. Right, cerita Dragon Ball pula. But actually, there is process of that. Alright, if you guys are familiar with the term, with the animal called axolotl, alright? Familiar with that? Pernah dengar ke?
Tak pernah.
Tak pernah dengar?
Tak.
Alright, try to look at it. It's quite cute actually. Axolotl ni is a amphibians. Is amphibians, alright? Axolotl ni is an amphibian, alright? Dia ni boleh jumpa dekat dalam air ataupun dekat dalam gua-gua lah sebenarnya. Nak boleh kata dia macam newt, N-E-W-T, dia macam salamander jugalah, alright? So dia particular family lah. So what happened with the axolotl ni is that kalau tangan dia putus, dia can regenerate tangan dia balik. But with the good condition of environment lah, dia boleh growth balik. Alright, so that is axolotl sebenarnya. Alright, so axolotl ni this is part of, dia macam cicak, part of it kita understand cicak lah, dia boleh regrow cepat sebab kita boleh nampak clearly lah. Alright, cicak itu buah ekor and so on. But there's one quite interesting animal is called it axolotl. Alright, So dia boleh dijumpa dekat dalam gua-gua lah sebenarnya. Alright, the amphibians, dia boleh regenerate back dia punya structure of the body kalau dia hilang atau patah atau putus. Alright, so vegetative reproduction ni is more organism that vegetative lah. Senang ceritanya, awak ada kentang, awak tanam kentang, sebiji kentang tu boleh tumbuh balik. Ataupun awak ambil one part of the punya structures lah. Replanting them back, then we reproduce back. Alright, so this is where they quite interesting as well. Alright, so I guess that's all for today. Any questions before we end the session? Ada questions? No?
Tak ada.
Tak ada Alright. Oh. So hold on. Okay. Stop sharing. Right. Alang-alang ada masa sikit ni. Sebentar. Okay, sekejap So this is axolotl. Pernah nampak?
Pernah.
Yes. Ada jual kat kedai aquarium jugalah. So dia punya gills tu dekat luar. Dan bila gills dia terputus pun they can survive again. They can regenerate back. So this is axolotl actually. It's more on is quite interesting animal, I could say, right? So they can regenerate back. So would be very interesting study if we can do that. How well dia punya cell can regenerate, and that will be very good for scientific research, I could say. Alright. So this is the axolotl. Some people like it, some people say it cute. If you guys want to blur dia boleh. No harm, dia tak ada restriction. Cuma the condition to culturing them is quite tedious lah. Not tedious lah. They just more on, dia suka air yang sejuk je. Right, around 20 degrees and so on. Dan dia kena air yang bersih lah untuk them to have a very good recovery phase. Right. So kalau ada beli ikan dengan dia boleh, tak ada masalah. Cuma ikan awak akan kena makan. Alright. So I guess that's all for today. Alright. So I will just share the slides in the iTaklim later. Alright. So wish you guys the best and have a good rest before you guys have the laboratory session in the evening later. Alright. So that's all for me. Let's end the session with tasbih kafaran solat nas. Alright. Thank you so much everyone. That's all for today. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Alright. Thank you.
Thank you, Doktor.
Thank you.